In history, there are names that just send a shiver down your spine. And today, we're going to talk about one of them, Irma Grese. She was a woman who somehow went from being a quiet rural girl to one of the most infamously cruel and sadistic guards in the entire Nazi death camp system.
You know, nothing captures the sheer horror of Irma Grese better than this quote from Dr. Gisella Perl, a prisoner who survived Auschwitz. She was one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen, and yet the most depraved, cruel, imaginative pervert I ever came across. That contradiction, right there, is the key. An angelic face that hid an absolutely monstrous soul, and that's exactly what made her so terrifying to the people under her control.
So this leads us to the central question we're going to explore. How on earth does a young woman, someone described in her youth as shy and anxious, transform into a sadist so vile she's nicknamed the hyena of Auschwitz? Well, to even begin to find an answer, we have to go right back to the start.
Yeah, to understand the monster, you really have to look at the child. Her story doesn't kick off in a death camp. It begins, believe it or not, in the German countryside, inside a family life that was really defined by tragedy and some very rigid authority.
Her personal timeline, it's almost tragically mapped right onto Germany's timeline. Born in 1923, she's only 9 years old when Hitler comes to power. So that means her entire school life is just saturated with Nazi ideology. And then comes this huge personal blow. When she's 12, her mother takes her own life. This seems to be a real turning point. She becomes more withdrawn, gets bullied, and just 2 years later, she drops out of school entirely. Just a quiet girl who, by all accounts, avoided confrontation.
And her home life, well, it didn't offer much in the way of comfort or stability. Her father was a very strict, disciplinarian kind of guy. And what's really interesting is that even though he later joined the Nazi Party himself, at first, he completely forbade his daughters from joining any of the youth groups. This just created a massive rift between them. For a lonely, isolated girl like Irma, the whole idea of the Nazis, the uniforms, the camaraderie, it must have seemed like a perfect escape. A new family, a powerful identity. And at just 15, she made her choice. She left home for good. She chose the party over her own father.
So Irma's search for a place to belong led her down an incredibly dark career path. She actually wanted to be a nurse, but instead, that ambition became her entry point into the absolute horrors of the Nazi regime. It really set the stage for her full transformation into a concentration camp guard. And this path, it just shows this systematic process of desensitization. First, she's at this sanatorium, assisting a doctor, Karl Gebhardt, a notorious Nazi who performed these agonizing experiments on women prisoners from the Ravensbrück camp. So for 2 years, Irma is just immersed in this world where unbelievable cruelty is passed off as science. When she fails to qualify as a nurse, it's actually Gebhardt who suggests her new career. Why not become a guard at that very same camp? And so, at just 18, her formal training as a monster began.
You have to understand, Ravensbrück was way more than just a camp. It was a brutal, brutal training ground. It was basically a school for violence, where new recruits were systematically stripped of every last shred of empathy. When Survivor told this chilling story about how the prisoners used to have a grim little game, they'd measure how long it took a new guard to become as cruel as the rest. She remembered one young woman who was so polite on her first day, she actually said, "Excuse me," to a prisoner. It took her exactly 4 days to adopt the required level of sadism. This was the environment that put the finishing touches on Irma Grese's transformation. So in 1943, Irma goes home for a visit, and she's proudly wearing her SS uniform. When she starts telling her father about her work at the camp, he, despite being a Nazi himself, apparently just flew into a rage. He beat her, threw her out of the house, and told her never, ever to come back. This moment, something she actually cried about during her trial, was the final, decisive break from her old life. Her family was gone. The SS was now her entire world, her only source of identity, her only source of approval.
Okay, so in March 1943, she's been fully indoctrinated, she's been cast out by her family, and now 19-year-old Irma Grese gets transferred to the biggest, most notorious of all the Nazi camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau. And it was here, in the absolute epicenter of the Holocaust, that her sadistic nature would finally be given free rein.
Her rise through the ranks was just terrifyingly fast. By the time she was 20 years old, she'd been promoted to senior supervisor. That's the second highest female rank in the camp. And it gave her absolute power, the power of life and death, over 30,000 women. Think about that. That's not a block of prisoners. That's the population of a small city. And she could torture and kill any one of them whenever she felt like it.
And here's where it gets even more twisted. In the middle of this unimaginable filth, starvation, and death, Grace was meticulously, obsessively focused on her own appearance. Survivors remember her just strutting through the camp in these perfectly tailored uniforms, her blonde hair styled just so, always surrounded by a cloud of expensive perfume. She once said that after the war, she was going to be a movie star. This grotesque vanity, set against a backdrop of complete human degradation, just made her presence all the more terrifying. Her actions are what earned her that name, the Beautiful Beast. Her cruelty wasn't just systematic. It wasn't just following orders. No, it was deeply personal. It was creative, and it was sadistic. Survivors testified that she took genuine pleasure in selecting prisoners for the gas chambers, and she would often pick women she thought were more beautiful than her, purely out of jealousy. She carried a plaited whip and would beat women until they collapsed, then kick them to death with her heavy, steel-capped boots. She starved her dogs and then just unleashed them on prisoners. She would shoot people for absolutely no reason, just for her own amusement. The list of her depravities, it's just sickening and almost endless. And amidst all of this relentless brutality, there were these bizarre, fleeting moments that you could almost mistake for humanity. She apparently saved one girl who she thought looked like her sister. She developed a weird bond with a Jewish prisoner, even apologizing to her once after a particularly brutal whipping. But these moments, they didn't make her any less of a monster. If anything, they made her even more terrifyingly unpredictable. It proved she was capable of human emotion, but she consistently, actively chose sadism instead.
So as the Allied forces start closing in and the whole Nazi regime begins to just crumble, Grise's reign of terror wasn't over. Her path took her to one final camp, Bergen-Belsen, where her cruelty just continued right up until the very end.
Her final year was just this swift, dramatic fall from power. After fleeing the Soviets from Auschwitz, she gets to Bergen-Belsen in March 1945 and immediately earns herself a new nickname, the Beast of Belsen. Just a month later, British troops liberate the camp and arrest her. By September, she's in the dock as a defendant in the Belsen trial, and on December 13, 1945, she was executed.
Even when she was faced with just overwhelming evidence, with survivor after survivor telling their story, Irma Grese showed absolutely no remorse. She was defiant. She laughed during testimony. She dismissed everything. This quote right here, it reveals a mind that was just completely consumed by Nazi ideology. She wasn't just following orders. She truly, genuinely believed that the mass murder she took part in was a necessary duty to secure Germany's future.
Her very last word, spoken to the British executioner on the gallows, was Schnell. It means quickly, no repentance, no final words of regret, just a final, cold command. She went to her death at 22 years old, as unrepentant as she had lived.
So what do you take away from all this? The story of Irma Grese it's more than just the tale of a single monster. It forces us to confront these really uncomfortable questions about indoctrination, about human nature, and about how someone who seems ordinary can become an architect of such extraordinary evil.
You can really trace her life along this chilling 5-point arc. 1, she starts as this troubled kid just primed for the Nazi message. 2, the system then nurtures and rewards her natural capacity for sadism. 3, that paradox of her beauty and her brutality becomes her trademark. 4, she becomes an enthusiastic killer, not just someone going along with it. And 5, her total lack of remorse, right to the end, makes her this terrifying symbol of how ideology can just completely erase morality.
And this brings us to the final, lingering question. And it's a tough one. While the Nazi system, without a doubt, gave her the opportunity and the justification for her crimes, you have to remember thousands of other guards served in those same camps, but very few displayed the same level of personal, imaginative, and vicious sadism as Irma Grese. So, did the system simply unleash a monster that was already there, or did it meticulously create one from the raw material of a shy, angry girl? It's a question with no easy answer, and one that serves as this permanent warning about the darkest corners of human potential.